Suzy, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. You are on deck. It's funny, I laugh a little bit now because I feel that I should say that at the beginning, like, you're on deck, right? Because it's the name of the podcast.
Yes,
I'm still working on my ability to say it in a way that doesn't seem like it's staged. Did that feel staged? Suzy, you're on deck.
I'm on deck. We're on deck.
Here we are. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to be sitting across from you.
It's nice to be here.
Good. As I was saying before, this is episode number 5, and in the previous episodes, as with most, we just sit down and start talking, and I really don't know where it's going to begin. With you, for some reason, I've been thinking about it for a couple of days, and I know exactly what my first question or observation is, and I'll get to that just in a second. Everybody, I've got 2 questions pretty much for everybody, because the whole initial gist of this is for us to get to know each other, right?
Okay.
Like everybody here, the first round of all these podcasts is all of our crew, and my desire is to get to know each one of you better, and for us to also perhaps during this conversation realize that there's a commonality or a specific thread or a particular idea that we can flesh out in this conversation and then hopefully use here in the agency.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I do have a couple questions, but that was a long and meandering way through the woods to get to my first statement, which is, number 1, you are now our media director here at the agency, so congratulations.
Thank you.
You're one of our newer crew members here at the agency within the last year. My initial observation of amongst many, which I shared with you yesterday, that I think you're really doing a great job, and you've brought a lot of good professionalism and experience to our agency. So I thank you for that.
You're very welcome. I'm glad it's being used.
It is, yes, and it will continue to be so. If I were to have an observation, I would say, and this is a very positive observation in terms of how I feel, you are a very meticulous person. That's what I've been thinking about for 2 days, the word meticulous, right? And when I think about that, it starts with how you present yourself in the office every single day. Like your outfits are meticulous, like head to toe, everything is just right, super coordinated, but not too matchy, like it's just right. And so when I think about that, and I'm not distilling you down to that, but if I've thought about you for the last couple of days in the context of this conversation, I've said, she's a very meticulous woman from my perspective. So my question to you is, if that is an accurate statement.
I think to some extent, yes. I'm laughing because being that I come from a corporate advertising background, we had to wear a lot of suits. So I think that we transitioned into the more casual, more free-spirited marketing world, which is great. I have to laugh because I'll tell you, it's very funny you said that. My very first job at an agency, I was a media assistant, and there was 2 or 3 assistants, and it was a DR agency, and I had a part-time job at Neiman Marcus. So I had to wear skirts or dresses on Mondays and Thursdays because I worked 6 to 9 at Neiman's. And there was 2 trips coming up, one in LA and one in San Francisco. And the president of the agency, it was a small agency, was going to go with one media director. We had 2 different media directors. And I got called into his office and he said to me, you've been promoted to junior buyer. And I was like, okay. And he said, you're going with so-and-so out to San Francisco for this conference. And I was like, But his assistant's been here a lot longer than me. And he said, I can't send Madonna to San Francisco because it was in that, like she was more like the shoulder off the,
the blouse, the shirt off the shoulder, right?
And, the little kitten heels with ruffle socks. And she was a really nice girl. I mean, really nice.
Right.
And she worked really hard. But his perception was that I was going to go out there and represent the company in a more professional way than she was.
Right. How did that feel to be on the receiving end of that?
It was sort of cool.
Yeah,
it was,
right.
And as my career changed and grew, I mean, I wound up buying suits, and I don't have to wear them now, so I have them.
It's a different world that we
Yes.
live in, and I will say in that first response, I feel like there's like 4 or 5 things that we can mine into in this conversation, and I hope that I do a good job of getting us there. But it's a different day and age that we live in right now. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned the other day when you were listening to one of the other podcasts that I think I communicated, and what I was trying to communicate is that we've always had someone here who has a longer historical connection to the advertising business going back to New York 30, 40 years. And if I recall correctly, you're not actually from New York, right?
I grew up in New York.
Oh, okay, you did.
Yes, but I never worked in New York, but I worked for agency that was out of New York that had a Fort Lauderdale office.
Okay, so I apologize for misconnecting those items, but I knew that you always had this connection, and I think that that's a real important piece for our business, and it's something that I really like and I enjoy, is that you are the most recent iteration of somebody working here that has that connection back to that time. I grew up in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. Tom and I talked about that the other day. And I like the connection back to that time and that particular geographical location, because I think everybody understands that advertising has a real foundational history in the city
Madison
of New York,
Avenue.
right? Of course. And so particularly as it pertains to now, from the media perspective, there's something that goes back to that time that tends to travel the longest through the media side of the business. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
Yes. I guess for one reason is because when I was in school,
right,
he wasn't a professor, he was the vice president of an agency, and he taught one night a week at the university. And media, he said, because everybody wants to be an account executive, but he said the best account executive started in media, because a client either loves or hates the creative, and if they love it, you then have to sell them on spending the money in media so that message that they love is being heard or seen.
Right.
So therefore it ties back to media. So you have to, so even the best AEs in the world, like you have a media background, you know media somewhat.
Well, I worked at Zimmerman.
Right.
That was my entry into the advertising business. And Zimmerman was such a, at the time, for the retail automotive sector, such a media powerhouse. And so media was so important,
yes.
And understanding, we had to really learn about it and understand how to, communicate it and sell it to the clients.
It gives you a great basis.
Yes.
So that's why I think the media part does come all the way back, as you said.
Now, is it fair to say that the majority... Let me rephrase this. The majority of my experience with senior level media people, such as yourself, tends to be on the female side.
I have an answer for you.
Why is that?
Okay. The media director that I worked for at the ad team many years ago,
right,
he said that he ran Cunningham and Walsh, and he said that when college students came out of school and they wanted to get into advertising, the women, they didn't care if they were the receptionist, just to get their foot in the door. Mm-hmm. They'd start in accounting or the receptionist or media assistants or whatever. And the guys always wanted to start as an account executive and make, they thought they were going to make the big bucks right out of school.
Right.
Whereas women tended to be slow and steady up the pace of
their career growth, right?
Which was, and looking back, he's right. I've only worked with like 2 or 3 men in the media business that were buyers.
Right.
So
are you saying that a lot of women entered into the business, they went to work at an agency as a receptionist or maybe an executive assistant, but through displaying their talents and ability and their own particular drive, earned those
Correct.
opportunities, and media was an avenue that they tended to fall into?
Yes, I think that's what happened. And also media buyers, I think that women tend to be, maybe I'll use your word, meticulous, a little bit more meticulous on in the big agency world, the cost per points, the GRP levels and all that. You tend to, dig a little more.
Interesting.
Interesting.
There's an interesting parallel because we're, obviously we're in the retail automotive sector, and I have observed a similar career trajectory in the automotive side of our business for women, but the destination is different. So in the advertising business, you're saying a lot of women came in as executive assistants or receptionists or whatever, and they work their way up into the media side of the business. And the media side of the business, it should be noted, is very mathematical, right? It's a lot of numbers, it's a lot of data, it's a lot of analysis. My parallel story that I'm going to share with you on the retail automotive business is that there's a lot of women that go into the business and start off in a receptionist type of position and end up in the accounting department and end up rising up to be, controllers and chief financial officers in the automotive business. I've seen it so many times, and I'm not saying that they're exactly the same, but there's this interesting parallel and path of women being able to enter into these 2 separate businesses, start at the bottom, and work their way up into a particular executive level position that is highly analytical and highly mathematical. And I think that there's a lot of people who may have never heard this conversation or who are be hearing this conversation for the first time would say, I don't know that that's something that I would have expected. And I think it's really interesting.
The other really interesting thing is that as the big agencies started to let their buyers, the women, I should say, work from home, mothers. At a previous job I had, my immediate supervisor had been a media director at Donor. And he said that his female buyers, they were on the spot, they never missed a deadline or anything. But that the male buyers, tended to slack off. And he thinks that it's because you never wanted to be the woman that ruined it for everybody else, because they were women that they weren't stopping their career to have a family. They were having a family and having a career, and they were working together at it. So they were being very liberal by letting them work from home, maybe come in once a week or whatever. But being that we work on computers and like we did here from COVID, everyone worked remotely. And so the media departments are really the first ones to sort of like jut out of the agency and become remote.
Interesting. Now, if you were a plane, you just like kind of did a touch and land on a very potentially delicate subject, but I'm going to, for whatever reason, I feel like going there.
Okay.
Number one, having, at this stage of my life, later in my life, having a family and seeing and experiencing the incredible amount of work and responsibility that it takes for anyone to raise a child, right? And I think
man or woman,
it's still a responsibility that in a lot of cases falls on a woman's shoulders. Not saying that's right or wrong. That's just my observation. However, in my experience, we've shared that as much as possible. But my wife carries a very heavy load when it comes to raising kids and being present in that experience. To do that and also balance a career is an incredible accomplishment. Incredible. It's an incredible accomplishment to be a mother as it is on its own, without a doubt. You throw in the complexity of then having a career, and a career perhaps where perhaps you're looking at your own investment of time as maybe even more critical as some of the men are looking at it, because men have a different perspective on their career and their role in the workplace. Women in many cases are balancing this. It's a remarkable feat, and I think that it deserves an enormous amount of credit for any woman who can do that.
I'm sure. I mean, I have not had children, but still just working a career, and we've talked about my history before.
Yes.
And what I did, as far as maintaining my career and doing what I had to do for my husband at the time, was similar in many ways. And you have to, you have to work it out. Let's put it that way. You have to find the balance.
Let's put a flag in that island of what you just touched on, and maybe we'll come back to that at some point in time, because I know that's a huge piece of your more recent existence. There's two things that I would like to circle back on, right?
Okay.
The meticulousness. Okay, now so we talked about the meticulousness in the business, and the meticulousness for you in some ways came back from your job in retail at Nordstrom or Neiman Marcus?
Neiman Marcus. I've worked at Neiman's and I've worked at Saks.
Okay. My mother was a long-time retail clothing executive.
I was to say aficionado.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she ran her own stores and what have you, and so I've grown up in close proximity to this. So two questions. Did the meticulousness, did your personal appearance meticulousness, did it come from your family, or was it learned later on as you worked in retail?
I think it was more learned later on. I was always clean and dressed for school. Growing up in New York, I grew up in a very middle-class family. I had what I needed to have, but there wasn't, oh, Mom, so-and-so got this dress, I have to have it. Just because she has it, you don't need to have it. If she jumped off the roof, would you jump off the roof? It was one of her things.
So old school, right?
Yeah. So I think that I learned, what I had, I took care of, sort of. But I think that as I got into the workforce and I was working 2 jobs and, a discount here and, oh, it's on sale. And I think I sort of found my own style and honed in on it. And that's what I don't think I wear a lot of like super duper trendy clothes. I wear more classic.
Yeah, you've got a real classic style about you.
They used to tease
clean,
me.
but it's feminine, it's clean, it's classic, and it's you.
Yeah.
It's appropriate to you. It's obvious.
Someone once said that I could be a Ralph Lauren model because I
see that, with the boots and you got the whole thing. That's interesting. So interesting. Would it surprise you to know that at one stage in my life, I actually worked in the retail clothing business for a short period of time?
That would be cool.
I did. I worked at a Banana Republic. And the only thing that triggered that thought is you talked about the discount, right? Like, so this was in college or after college, and I had 2 jobs while I was pursuing my big career as a musician playing in a band, right? So I worked at a restaurant and I worked at Banana Republic for like 4 months, right? And as you know, if you work in a retail clothing store, you spend your whole paycheck, right? Like every bit of money that I earned there, I bought clothes and that was it, and that was done. But I don't think many people would know that that's something that I actually did for a short period of time.
It's so funny because when I was at the ad team and I worked at Saks, I had a friend that was another buyer there at the ad team, and she said to me one Monday we were there, and she said to me, "Oh, did you shop? I mean, work this weekend?"
Exactly. So. Interesting. See, it's a small world. You always find commonalities when you get into a conversation. Okay, so that leads me to my first official question.
Okay.
Official question, which is, and I think you've already begun to go down this road, what is it that drew you into this business?
That's a really good question. I'm not really sure. I don't know if I fell into it, because I really didn't. I started college thinking I was going to be a doctor. And
did your parents want that, or did you want that?
I don't know. I went to the Bronx High School of Science, and it seems like all of us ended up, like, oh, we're going to be doctors. And I don't know if I really knew what I wanted to be. So my freshman year, I was a pre-med major. My sophomore year, it was called Human Services. It was sort of like being taught how to be a professional volunteer, but it wasn't social work. Mm-hmm. And then my third year, I got into communications, and that's sort of what started to pique my interest in all of this. So I think that I sort of like had to find my way. And when I got out of school, I was trying to find jobs within that realm, and finally I did, and wound up in media. I did promotions for a while. And I just sort of like, I started it. I found out I liked it. And I have this theory, or someone, I think you also said it, that if you like what you do, you'll be good at it and you'll advance at it. And people will in turn pay you well for it, mm-hmm. because you're good. And I think that that's very true. I mean, why would you want to spend your life doing something that you hate?
Well, if you're asking that as a question and not specifically a rhetorical question, the answer is, for a lot of people, they look at the responsibility of either providing for themselves or providing for their families, and they do what they think they need to do in order to achieve that goal. I think we would both agree, based on how you're asking the question, that unfortunately that typically doesn't work out. That leaves people with a feeling of dissatisfaction.
Well, I think that there are those people who go into the family business for whatever mm-hmm. that may be because they have to, but they're not into it. Their heart isn't into it. So does the business suffer, the family business, at that point?
It can, and it's interesting that you say that, and I'll touch on just a little bit more. The retail automotive business is, I think, primarily initially a distinctly American business. And if you look at a lot of the big retail automotive operations around the country, mm-hmm. now a lot of them have been purchased by the larger public companies, right? But every one of those, groups or platforms, every one was a family Correct. Business at some point in time. And many of them go back 2 and 3, maybe 4 generations to families that, coming out of the 1800s into the 1900s, some of them might have been horse traders, right? And then you had Ford and the Model T. Mm-hmm. And so you begin this automotive business in the United States. So you have these generational businesses. And if you ask most people in the car business, it's almost always the first generation that are the typically, and I'll upset a lot of people by saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Okay.
It's the first generation that typically those are the real gutsy entrepreneurs, male or female, mm-hmm. right, that established the family business, right? And then you have a second generation that grows into it, right? Some love and embrace and go on for success. Others are born into this situation where they're like, well, it's the family business, and I feel this duty and this sense of honor to go on and do it. But a lot of times the second generation wasn't as good as the first generation because they didn't have that passion in their heart. They're number one, they're perhaps born into a situation of more financial security, a higher quality of life, mm-hmm. and a different drive to go into the business. And again, I know this will probably upset a lot of people. That's not to say that every second generation car dealer isn't good or didn't want to it, but a lot of them, I've met a number of them that I knew specifically, they didn't love the business. They were carrying the mantle of the family because they felt they had an obligation to keep it going, but they didn't love it, which is, to your point, it's like, if you don't love what you do, are you going to be as successful? And in a lot of these instances, these men and women who inherited the business mm-hmm. may not have succeeded to the same level. Not across the board. and there's a lot of further generations that are taking it to the next level. But it's tough, you don't have to, and not everybody has the ability to, but to be able to live a life that is partly in the pursuit of what you love is really meaningful.
I agree. I think that's what's part of happiness. You have to do something that is good for you. You know, me being a doctor was not going to be good for me. I can't even think of.
Okay, right. But here you are. And so in that vein, what is it? And I don't know how many years you've been in this career field, but you've got a significant amount of history and experience. What is it that still provides that sense of value or accomplishment for you?
I think at times what will happen is that we'll go into a market, or everyone expects it to be very black and white, and sometimes you have to look at that gray or colored area and take a chance and say, well, you know what, so if we skim a little money here and a little money here, and let's try this a little bit. I think that when you find that next station or that next outlet, or that's sort of good, that helps. I don't mind the numbers. I guess I have a head for numbers that I never realized when I was little. I mean, I did well in school, but it's just something that you become comfortable with and you like it. And I think you have to be comfortable doing what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Now, let me flip that on you.
Okay.
Are there times throughout your career when, despite your knowledge and experience, you found yourself being very uncomfortable? And is there value to that?
Yes. And I think the value is that you have to work your way through it to the comfort level, to a comfort level. It may not be the ultimate comfort level, but it's a comfort level that you can deal with and work with, which may eventually, rise up to, something extraordinary.
Do you find that you can become too comfortable?
I guess you could, but I don't think you can allow yourself to do that because you work with slack. So you still have to keep on top of the meticulousness.
If you, I'd like to add a thought to that. I think that regardless of what you believe philosophically or theologically, I think that the world, the universe, God, whatever you want to assign the title to, has a way of making sure that you don't get too comfortable. Recognizing that moment, I think, is a challenging thing for some people, because some people reach a level of comfort and they don't want to leave that comfort zone, right? But something's going to prod you, and either you respond to it or you don't. I'm a big believer that, okay, you want to work to succeed and try to create and provide as beautiful a life as you possibly can for yourself, for your family, whoever it is that is important to you in your world. But there's those times that come along that just shake you out of it. And those are those moments when something is telling you this is your next opportunity for growth.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that. I think that when, I've worked for a company that went under. And so you were forced at that point to move on. There was no ifs, ands, and buts. You didn't have a job anymore. So you move along and you start over. And what you bring with you from your history, hopefully when you move on to wherever you go to, they're going to go, oh, this is good. Yes, we can use this. Right. And you build up, you have that sort of like base to build upon.
All right. So another question. So you brought that as an example so that it would be safe for me to assume that you've been through that experience.
Yes, I have.
Okay. So let's just walk ourselves through that experience just a little bit. The company you're working for goes under, and all of a sudden you're out on the street and you have to decide, okay, how am I going to proceed? Like, what goes through your mind at that point in time, and what are your first steps of action?
After you redo your resume?
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
In advertising, especially, advertising is a very small world, and media is even smaller. So I think that what I did was I started to reach out to people in the media world and said, hey, I need to find a job. You know me. If you hear of anything, please let me know. So it's a networking thing. I think at the time I looked at whatever was Monster or whoever was the big job search at the time.
Right.
But, within 2 weeks I had a job. I'm not at that job now, but it was a job. And it was, sometimes you take a job to have a job so you can continue doing what you're doing. And it may not be the perfect job for you, but it's better to find a job when you have a job.
Yes, exactly.
So, but you just have to, it's that saying, you pick yourself up by your bootstraps and you just go on. That's what you have to do.
It's interesting because what you're essentially saying is that as you develop your career and you develop your talent and ability, the parallel process of developing your network of people, not only that you know and like or love and trust, but those people have a sense of who you are and what you're capable of.
That's why you don't burn bridges in business. You don't burn bridges.
It's interesting. We're coming up on almost 15 years in business as an agency. And I mean, I can almost say with pride that we've been fired a lot of times, over the course of that period of time, because it's a performance-based business, and people make this, dealers make decisions about, and maybe we're going to go in this direction. We've always exited on the high road. We've always exited under the premise of, we'll do whatever we can and everything that we can up to you, for you, right up to that final moment. We're always friends. The door is always open. You never know. And I can't tell you how many times that we've had business that has left that's come back just because of that exact same thing. We didn't burn the bridge. We didn't get upset. Certainly it hurts to lose an account or a job, right? But people make decisions. I think sometimes people think that the decisions are very personal. Now, very rarely are the decisions in business personal. They are business decisions, right? And you have to understand and respect that whoever you're working with or for makes a decision that they feel is best for their business, and that might not include you right now. That doesn't mean that it can't include you in the future, or that they wouldn't say something really nice about you to something else down the road. Right. And it sounds like you've experienced that and been able to be mindful enough to follow that path.
I think you have to. You can't, shut yourself out in the cold and then be stuck with nothing.
Right.
You have to maintain some level of, not humanity, but just, consciousness of what you're doing and saying if you choose to leave a company, or if a company chooses to leave you. If a company that went under, if they came back, would I go back to them? I don't know.
Right.
You have to weigh, this is the reason they went under. Is that set of parameters in place for the new company? Do you feel it's going to work? So,
as you're saying that, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm also thinking of something. We live in a world right now. It's extremely comfortable, right? I mean, if you were to look at the average life of any one of us, even here at the office, and that's not to say that any one of us don't have hardships, but overall, our life is very comfortable. We live in safe and secure homes. We drive cars to work. We have jobs. We make money. We have families and friends, and we do all this stuff. And so there's this. I don't want to say it's an illusion, but there is this surrounding notion of comfort and everything is okay, right? But when you lose or potentially lose your ability to provide your own livelihood, or if you have a livelihood that you need to provide for your family, it's a very scary and almost primal thing. Like immediately in my mind, I can imagine like, what was it like? What must have been? This is gonna sound crazy. What must it have been like for Neanderthal man or woman, right, to survive on this planet and be able to some way somehow provide food, shelter, and security for their family, when literally walking out the front door meant that you could almost you're
eaten by an animal,
right? You're almost guaranteed death, right? And so we certainly don't live in that world now, but there's an underlying quality that I think we all inherently understand, that is, if you don't get out there and fucking perform or do what needs to be done, you could find yourself in a challenging situation for yourself and your family, right? And it takes a while for that to fully settle in, don't you think?
I think so, and I think that you also always have to be prepared in a way, because you never know what's going to happen. So you always have to put a little aside for a rainy day, or in your mindset, do that.
Right.
Have a savings account, do whatever. Make sure that if, something, God forbid, happens, you have the ability to take care of that event.
Who taught you that?
My parents.
Yeah?
I think.
What were your parents like?
My mother, well, back then, she was a stay-at-home mother. My father was in retail. He was the manager of a store that sold fine accessories for the home. So...
meticulous. This goes right here, and it'll look nice right there. Yes, and this would be really nice right there.
But that was just the way. My father was a child of the Depression. They both were. So to them, having savings and not living totally outside your means was very important. So I think that the value of hard work and money and savings and all that was instilled in me. Everyone always says, well, you're an only child, why? I think my parents wanted to be able to give the right amount and the proper amount to one child than to have multiple children that they couldn't give to fairly and substantially, I think is the term I would use.
Why am I not surprised that you're an only child? I didn't know that, but you just said that, and I'm like, yeah, that makes total sense. And I don't know why I would even say that.
I am. But I'm not a bratty only child.
No. Not suggesting that at all. My dad was an only child. I don't know. There's just only child, like that. There's a little bit of
you have to learn for yourself.
Yes, but I find that only children, if they don't turn out bratty and spoiled, right? There's a confidence that they have. There's a particular grounded confidence that I find in only childs, whatever you want to say, that I think comes from receiving that uninterrupted, unconditional love from your parents, right? Like it's a lot of it's reflected to you, and I think that does a lot developmentally for a child. It can.
I think it does. My mother was very big on, my father worked like 6 days a week, and my mother was very big on Sunday that there was father-daughter time. So I have, if you go through this box of pictures I have, there's pictures of me as a little kid, going to the Statue of Liberty with my dad on a Sunday, or the World's Fair and things like that, doing things that like bonded us. You have a daughter. Do you think that you're closer to your daughter or your son? I know your children are little.
Well, as you're telling this story, immediately I'm thinking all these incredibly fond thoughts of my daughter. I absolutely listen. I love both of my children,
well, of course.
And they're at different ages. One's 3, one's almost 10 months. So my son his personality it's only just starting to flicker through, right?
Right.
And that bond and that connection is just beginning to build. With my daughter, at 3, she is now of an age where her personality is starting to develop. We've spent time together, and I find myself understanding what it means to like have that father-daughter relationship. Like I really look at her, I love her, I adore her, I respect her as the person that she's coming into, and I can only think of how wonderful it will be to be able to have hopefully many, many years of those experiences with her, right? My experiences with my son will be different, but I do recognize what it is that you're saying without being able to put it specifically into words.
I mean, I was very close to both of my parents, and that was part of her rearing of me, that I had to have time with my dad, because she was with me, after school and, PTA and Girl Scouts and, all that kind of stuff. Whereas he worked, and so therefore when he was home, I told this story once that when I first moved out on my own, I told somebody that I had a father-daughter Sunday. And they said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, my father and I put a stereo cabinet together."
Right.
That was something that, he came over to my apartment. I bought this thing in a box, and you had to like get the screwdrivers out and, do it all together. And I gave him a beer. We sat and had a beer together, So it was a really cool thing, And I was older then, so he, it was cool to be able to hang out with him that way, as opposed to just like him taking me sledding or something.
Sure. That makes me, and just briefly think about what I understand of my own father's experiences with my sister as she got older and into college, and the visits that he would make and spend time with her. And I just know how special that was for the two of them, and certainly for my sister to be on the receiving end of that type of experience. So it's fathers, daughters, mothers, sons. I mean, I was closer to my mother growing up, so it's just it's interesting how that works out. I'm curious. So when we started the conversation, I was a little unclear as to where you grew up, and I knew there was a New York tie, but for some reason I crossed my wires there. Where in New York did you grow up?
Manhattan.
Where in Manhattan?
Washington Heights.
Now, where's Washington Heights? Like, I'm familiar with Manhattan, but I don't know every neighborhood.
North of the George Washington Bridge.
Okay.
So, there's...
East side or west side?
West side.
West side.
So, you know how Lin-Manuel Miranda has done this play, The Heights?
No.
Yes, there's a play. It was on Broadway. It's a musical called The Heights, and they've now turned it into a movie. He grew up in Washington Heights. In fact, he lives in the building, I believe, that is next to the building I grew up in.
So just real quick, and I'm going to ask more questions about that, but Washington Heights, it's Upper West Side, north of the GWB, and it's called Washington Heights because during the lead up to the Revolutionary War, the British came in and were chasing Washington up through Manhattan.
That was Fort Washington.
Right. Okay.
Fort Washington.
The little bit of history that I was able to retain, that was before he actually moved over into New Jersey to Fort Lee, and then went down all the way down to the Delaware, over into Pennsylvania, where ultimately the big crossing of the Delaware during Christmas, right?
Yes. So
I feel like I earned a little star on my report right there.
Yeah, so I lived in Washington Heights, and it was a great neighborhood. It still is. I still have friends that live there. Someone just sent me pictures of the snow yesterday.
Yeah, they got a big blizzard.
Oh,
right?
a big blizzard. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, it was a great place. I walked to elementary school. It was 2 blocks away. It was a really fun place to grow up.
Now, do you live like when you're at Washington Heights? Like what is the building that you live in like? I mean,
It's an apartment building.
It's an apartment building. Is it like a apartment building where you walk in and you're just up the stairs, or do you have a doorman? What's it like?
You walk into there's like a little vestibule, and you walk into a lobby.
Okay.
And there was 2 stairwells and an elevator and a row of mailboxes.
Okay.
And the building I lived in was 6 floors.
Okay. What floor did you live on?
2.
2. Did you walk or did you take the elevator?
Of course I walked.
That's so great.
Walked up and down those stairs all the time, ran up and down those stairs.
Do you, and so it's literally like, the typical New York building, right? I mean, do you hear, as you're a child growing up, are you hearing the sounds of the city at all times?
No.
Or is it more quiet?
It's more quiet. Yeah. Washington Heights was sort of, how they say like places outside the city are bedroom communities?
Yes.
I would say that Washington Heights was sort of a bedroom community within the borough. Mm-hmm. people took the train to work. They took the bus to work. I guess there were people that worked in our neighborhood, but the local businesses wasn't like Wall Street or anything.
Right.
You know?
And so that's still considered the borough of Manhattan, correct?
Yes.
The borough. Such a funny word, right?
We had the cloisters in the park north of where I was, which was beautiful for Tryon Park. It was just a really nice place to grow up.
How long did you live in Manhattan? To what age?
My parents moved when I was in college.
Okay, but you were there the whole time. So you went to Bronx Science.
Took the train.
I just remember, like, as a kid growing up in New Jersey, you'd see these kids, like, at my age at that time, you'd see kids in the Bronx Science. It was like a varsity jacket. You know, I see like Bronx Science. I didn't know what it meant. It just sounded like, ooh, that sounds like really cool in the city and smart.
You had to take a
Bronx
test.
Science.
You had to take a test to get in.
Right? So cool. At what point in your life did you start? Okay, so you live in Washington Heights, which is the upper. It's not really, you wouldn't call it the Upper West Side, really.
It's
like
the upper West
it's
Side.
The upper West Side.
A lot of people thought we were the Bronx because you could walk from one end of Manhattan to the other and go over a bridge and you'd be in the Bronx.
Right.
So it's because the borough narrows at the top. That's how it, like, you could practically walk to Riverdale because the Bronx sort of curves around and Riverdale was there.
Yankees games as a kid ever, or was that not really your family's thing?
More towards high school and stuff.
Okay.
You know.
When did you start venturing south into, you know, the depths of New York City? Like, did that happen for you at some point in time?
Yes. Well, when I grew up, it was a lot different than it is now. At a younger age, our parents, I guess, trusted us or whatever. You could take the train downtown on a Saturday and meet your friends from Queens or wherever, because science drew in students from all the boroughs. And you could meet your friends and, let's say, go shopping at Bloomingdale's and then have lunch and take the train home. So I think that when I was definitely
You just said meet your friends and go shopping at Bloomingdale's. I feel like...
That was the place
I know.
That was our meeting point.
I just heard my mom in my head. Sorry, I'm not equating the two, but so funny.
Well, because that was like usually your meeting point.
Sure.
You know, it's like, how could you not find it?
Right.
So you would do that and, you know, have lunch and walk around and then go home. So, you went to concerts.
Right.
You'd never think of letting, a 15-year-old go to a concert by themselves now, really.
I know, now that I think of it, my mom, we grew up in, New Jersey, in the country, but I would meet my friends in Dover, New Jersey. We would get on New Jersey Transit. We'd take the train to Hoboken, and then we go from Hoboken on the path into the city. Like 16,
right?
Going into the Lower East Side, CBGB's, and really going to experience, we wanted to see the rough and tumble of it, And so now as a parent, I'm like, oh my God, am I going to be okay with my kids doing something like that?
Did you ever do New Year's at Times Square?
Once.
I did it once.
Once.
And once is all you need to do it.
Horrible experience.
Too cold.
Well, it was cold. And I hadn't figured out drinking yet at that point in time. I didn't really, at that stage of my life, I don't know, I was 19, 20. I know I was home for college.
I was home from college,
and
too.
I still didn't really understand, how to just, have some drinks and work my way through the night. So I got terribly drunk and had an awful experience on New Year's Eve in Times Square and in and around New York City. And I think almost everybody has some version of that and goes, did that, not going there again.
You do it once in your life and you go, yeah, I did it, thank you.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So funny. So funny. Wow. Well, so many conversational topics that we can go down. And what I would like to say is, as I've explained to everybody, is that this is let's treat this as an ongoing conversation, right? We've started a piece of this conversation, gotten to know each other a little bit better, and we'll pick it up again soon.
That sounds fine.
I feel like right now feels like a good natural time to pause the conversation. So Suzy, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. I knew that I would, and I've enjoyed it more than I thought that I would. So
next time we have to talk about music.
Oh, forget it. Yeah, that's ours, and we will definitely do that. So,
all right,
Suzy,
good.
thank you for being on deck, and
Thank you, Chris.
for everything that you contribute here.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Cheers.